What's up guys? Today I wanted to cover the endgame version of the Trampleslide build I put out recently. It's quite similar to the non-unique version of the build with just a couple tweaks. The biggest addition to the build is Vasili's Prayer. Essentially what this does is it adds the Werebear and Shapeshift tags to our landslides. This enables tons of options, allowing us to scale it even further. The most important one is the Spirit Boon Masochistic. Since we're constantly generating Terramotes, which gives us 100% crit chance on our landslides, we're getting tons of healing from our trample. We're also able to tap into things like damage with Werebear skills, total armor in Werebear form, and get more value out of these because we now stay in Werebear form when using skills like Earthen Bulwark and Landslide. We'll also make sure to pick up Survival Instincts so we can get that execute damage to help finish off enemies. The other unique you might want to consider adding is Insatiable Fury. Now that we've converted Landslide to a Werebear skill, this will add ranks to it. If you get a high enough item level as well through upgrades, it will go from +2 to +3 ranks on the skills, even though the tooltip won't update. This chest also provides us with some pretty solid defensive stats. As you climb higher, some monsters might live a little longer, so don't be afraid to manually cast Landslide once in a while as well to help finish off elites or pick off the mobs that protect the enemies. Since we use Landslide a little more often, I opted to pick up Clarity. This allows me to easily weave one Stormstrike in between a Landslide cast to keep my spirit up. I think this is an amazing mid-game build and can very easily get you to level 100. But as I was climbing and trying to do higher level nightmare dungeons, I did notice a couple holes in the build that I wanted to make you guys aware of. Now, these are only issues when you're trying to go into like nightmare dungeon 70 plus, which is pretty high end content. These aren't really issues for anywhere else in the game. The biggest issue people will most likely notice first is getting really bad strings of RNG and not getting a Nature's Fury proc to reset their cooldowns. When you're one-shotting everything, you probably won't really notice this, but once things start living past 1 or even 2 tramples, and you do 10 storm strikes in a row and trample is still on cooldown, it starts to feel pretty bad. A lot of people's solution to this is to use the Great Staff of the Crone unique to get much more Nature's Fury procs. While I think this makes the build feel super smooth and quite fun to play, I felt like it really plummeted my damage, and you should really only use it when you're doing lower level content. You would think casting more tramples more often would make up for the loss in the damage of the 2 aspects from dual wielding, but that leads into the next issue I ran into. It really felt like the skill didn't do a lot of damage if I didn't have Terramotes. Terramotes were one of the main reasons I originally added Petrified to the build, and I really enjoyed that addition. But one big issue I had was, if you use Poison Creeper on a monster that you already have immobilized with Poison Creeper, it won't actually generate you extra Terramotes. I think if they fix this issue, it would solve the Terramote problem I have. But until then, it feels like your damage will severely fall off if the monster lives past the first trample. Other than that, the one issue that people made me aware of is that you really can't play this build on a controller. Apparently it makes it so that the trample targets the first nearby monster, and you can't actually trample through all of them. It's pretty unfortunate to hear, and hopefully Blizzard fixes this soon. Otherwise though, like I said, this is easily my favorite and most enjoyable mid-game build, and I would definitely recommend this now and in Season 1 if there aren't many balance changes. As always, I'm going to remind you guys to check out the notes section of the build. I usually put a lot of useful information in there. One thing though that I don't have to anymore, if you check on D4 builds, if you mouse over the piece of gear, I've tried to put the stats that you want in each slot here, so you don't have to look in the notes anymore. I try to keep them in order from most important at the top to least important at the bottom. And there's also some things that have more than one thing you can put on it. So for example, you could have critical strike damage, or you could have critical strike damage with earth skills. On the amulet, you could go for defensive passives, or you could go for offensive passives, or have move speed. Usually if there's changes like that, I will try to put them in the notes, so keep an eye out there. Starting with this skill tree, I mentioned there's not too many changes from the previous build, but I want to go over them again in case this is the first time you're seeing this. We take Storm Strike as our main skill. The reason we use this is Specifically, there's damage reduction and it has a great uptime with vulnerable, but more importantly, we're using this for the capstone Nature's Fury. Whenever we use a storm skill, we have a 20% chance to activate it, and then we will reduce the cooldown of our earth skills. So something I didn't mention before was you don't actually have to hit a monster to activate Nature's Fury, which is pretty cool. You can just stand in the corner, swinging your storm strike back and forth, and you can just get a proc and reset your cooldown. So don't feel like you have to run into melee range. I saw some people mentioning that they wanted to use Wind Shear instead. You totally could do this, but you don't have to hit the mobs to get the Nature's Fury proc. So it's really important to remember. Moving down the tree, we still have Wild Impulses. This increases the cost of our core skills. We very rarely use Landslide, so we're pretty much just getting the damage bonus on the Trampled Earth. So this is really good value. We have Landslide, of course. Putting points into Landslide does actually increase the damage of our landslides coming from Trampled Earth. So we want to make sure we're getting the ranks here on our gloves, and like I said, Insatiable Fury if you end up using that. The most important upgrade is the Terror Mount upgrade whenever we immobilize or stun enemies. So our Poison Creeper and our Petrify, we're gaining a stack of Terror Mount, and then every single time our landslide does damage, it will consume one Terror Mount, but it will guarantee a crit with 40 times crit damage. So very, very strong. Down here, we have 9% damage reduction while in Werebear form and for 3 seconds after leaving Werebear form. Now that we have Vasili's Prayer, this is up much more often. Whenever we're using something like Earthen Bulwark, we will stay or go into Werebear form. Same thing if you cast Landslides. So this should have much better uptime now as well, which is pretty important. Going down the tree, speaking of, we have Earthen Bulwark here. This will also have its cooldown reduced whenever we proc Nature's Fury. So you're pretty much swinging Storm Strike, trying to get resets on Earthen Bulwark and Trample. You're getting resets so often that I actually don't mind Earthen Bulwark only being a 3-second duration because you're constantly resetting it and reusing it. This is our main source of Unstoppable. So sometimes you might not want to use Earthen Bulwark as soon as it comes up, especially if you still have an Earthen Bulwark up. So pay a little bit of attention to that, because if you get stunned and you don't have this up, you can't reset the cooldown, right? So sometimes if I know I'm going to be able to spam a lot, or if I know the shield won't fall off, I'll just constantly be using this so I can keep it up and stay unstoppable. Another reason we want to try to use it as often as possible is because of our Vigilance passive here, 15% damage reduction for 6 seconds after using a defensive skill. So ideally we're trying to use this once every 6 seconds to get that 15% damage reduction, which feels pretty good. Moving down the tree, we have Poison Creeper, and then we go all the way to here. The 3-second increased duration on the poison. Basically, poisoned monsters gives us tons of benefits. We have damage reduction against poison enemies. We have increased damage against poison enemies. We have Envenom. So the duration is very, very good points here. Here's what I talked about earlier. We have Clarity now. And the reason I took this, like I said, was I felt like I needed to cast Landslide when I was fighting harder monsters. So it felt pretty good whenever I used Storm Strike to get 6 extra spirit. One thing to keep in mind that I think a lot of people haven't really got to yet, once you get higher level and you get more intelligence, that actually increases your resources gained. And that works for any source of resources gained. So for example, if you had insanely high intelligence and you had 100% increased resources gained, this would give you 12 spirit back instead of just 6. So I think I get 7 or 8 spirit back on this, so this gives it even more value. And then, Storm Strike gets it buffed by that as well. So you're getting over 20 spirit back easily whenever you're switching into human form and using Storm Strike with Clarity. I pulled the points out of Safeguard. Because we have Vasili's Prayer on now, we actually gain Fortify whenever we use Earth skills. So I would say if you are killing monsters with just Trample and you're not actually using Landslide, take the points out of Clarity, put them back into Safeguard. This will help make sure your Fortify stays up enough. Or if you're noticing you can't keep your Fortify up enough, put the points back in here. Fortify is much more important than anything else. We still have the points in Crushing Earth for the increased damage because we're constantly applying CC with both Poison Creeper and Petrify. We have Stone Guard. Our Fortify is important because this gives us the bonus here. One thing I want to call out is you notice I don't actually put a point into Trample. The reason is because I'm using Insatiable Fury. You can see I have 3 out of 5 points. So it actually saves us 1 skill point. You don't have to do this. If you are not using Insatiable Fury, you can take 1 point out of Clarity and put it back into Trample. I talked about this before, but the points behind Trample or more points into Trample don't really do anything for the build. We're not actually doing damage with Trample. And Trample does not affect the damage from the landslides coming off of us. So you don't need to put points in here for any of these. Moving down, of course, we have Envenom. I always talk about this. This is a multiplicative crit damage bonus. This is very, very strong. Easily Druid's best passive. You can see I have it all the way up to 6 out of 3. It's very easy to notice when you get an amulet with +3 on it, you will see your damage go up. It's super strong. Moving down, we have what I talked about before, Petrify. I'm loving Petrify with this build. I'm loving Petrify with Nature's Fury. I think it's been a great addition. I think it feels so good, especially when you cast it and you get a free Cataclysm as well. That's some nice lucky hit chance to kind of feed back into Calm Before the Storm and get Petrify up sooner. This is where Supreme Petrify starts to come in handy when I talked about using more landslides. You can petrify everything around you, and then you can just start casting landslides on groups of enemies, and you're pretty much not going to run out of spirit. So I like that. Defiance, nature magic skills deal more damage to elites. Natural disaster, we're applying vulnerable through the exploit glyph and storm strike, so we're getting great value there. And then resonance, of course, getting us good value as well. Down here we have quick shift. Quick shift only works on the trample and not the landslide, so we're not really looking to put points in here, but we have heightened senses to gain that extra damage reduction whenever we're switching into and out of Werebear. Finally, we have Nature's Fury, our capstone, which I've talked about. Whenever we're casting Storm Strike, we have a chance to reset the cooldown on our Earthen Bulwark and Trample. This is where it could maybe be a little RNG dependent whenever you're fighting higher monsters and you need to get it up quicker. But if you're doing any sort of like normal at level content or slightly above your level content, this probably isn't going to really be noticed because you're just going to trample and everything's just going to die. And by the time you get to the next pack of monsters, the cooldown's probably going to be up anyway. Moving on to our gear, like I mentioned, make sure you're checking the D4 build link below. I've tried really hard to put the stats on the gear. So my gear isn't perfect, but I try to put the stats you're looking for on the gear. So make sure you're looking for that. Vasili's Prayer, this is the helmet we've talked about now a few times. Makes our earth skills function as werebear skills and fortifies us. The thing you're looking for on here, I would say, is probably trying to get as high of life as possible. The overpower damage really doesn't do anything. Damage while shapeshifted, not a bad stat. Lightning resistance really doesn't do anything. Getting a good number on fortify is also not bad, but I'd say focus on getting the high life first and then try to get like a good fortify level. The biggest thing though is you want to try to get a very high item power on this piece of gear because it will give you more armor. So I'd say try to get high item power and high life. That would be the two things I'd focus on. Next, we have Insatiable Fury. For this one, it makes it so our werebears are now our true form and you gain +2 ranks to all werebear skills. With Vasili's Prayer, our landslide becomes a werebear skill. So we get the +2 ranks. I mentioned it before, but whenever you upgrade this, this is actually giving me +3 ranks to all my werebear skills. You could see my trample was at 3 out of 5. It doesn't show it on the tooltip, but it does go up to 3. Total armor while in werebear form and damage reduction while fortified. These are the two stats you're going to be looking to get as high as possible. The +2 ranks always stays the same, so you don't have to worry about that. But the damage reduction stats, you really want to get them as high as possible. If you had to pick one, I'd probably go for the armor over the damage reduction while fortified. Get the armor one as high as possible, and then hopefully you get the damage reduction while fortified high as well. On the gloves, we have the symbiotic here. I mentioned this before. I don't actually need it on my amulet because we have so much cooldown reduction with the amulet. My trample is a 9.53 seconds cooldown, which is not 8 seconds, but I really never noticed it not being up because by the time you trample and then use Storm Strike, pretty much a second has passed already anyway. So I really thought I was losing way too much value by just trying to get the 4 extra seconds on symbiotic on the neck. I think the damage you get from putting trampled earth there is just way better. Again, the stats are on the D4 build. Same with like Insatiable Fury and Vasili's Prayer. If you don't have these yet, you can see the stats that I put on there. So use those stats first. Then we have disobedience on our pants. You want to try to have disobedience in every single build right now. It's the most broken aspect. And then you can see tons of damage reduction, tons of armor. And then I'm really liking to get maximum life on my gear. I'm trying to get that. Feels like a good balance with all the damage reduction. On our boots, we have Ghostwalker. You can also use Ballistic here if you want to do more damage for the +2. I like Ghostwalker because you kind of trample in, you can move through. I like the move speed. On our weapon, I have Edgemaster. This is re-enabled and pretty much you're trampling when you're at max spirit, so it's just giving you extra damage. Moving up to the necklace, the big things you want to look for on here is ranks to Envenom and cooldown reduction. You want to try to find both of those. Cooldown reduction is the most important, so you can actually like really play the build, but then Envenom is also super important. And you can see here, this is where I have my trampled earth aspect. Normally this would only be up to 80% if I didn't put it on my amulet, but because we don't put symbiotic here, we get that extra 40% added on to get to 120%, so it feels way better, I think. On a ring, we have Aftershock. This makes it so that both our landslide and trampled earth cast double landslides, which is really important. Another small note here is if you read it, it deals an additional bonus damage per hit. This is consecutive hits in a row will deal increased damage. That's why trampled earth gets really, really hard hitting at the end, because it's so big and it does so many hits. It stacks up that 12% pretty quickly. Here we have natural balance. Since we're constantly casting Storm Strike, we pretty much have this up 100% of the time, giving us critical strike damage to landslide. Finally, I have retaliation here. Since we're using trampled earth, landslides are coming off of it, which is a core skill. So we're gaining that bonus based on our fortifying, where our fortify is always up thanks to Vasili and Safeguard. For our gems, we have damage reduction while fortified in the armor. On the weapon, I have critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. I thought this felt pretty good because it works against bosses, but you can also go critical strike damage to crowd control enemies as well. In the jewelry, we have skulls for the armor. For elixirs, I like to use the assault elixir for attack speed whenever I'm looking to be more offensive. And defensive, I really like the elixir of fortitude for maximum life. Moving on to our spirit boons, these are pretty much more or less the same with some slight tweaks. We still have wariness in deer for the damage reduction from elites. We now have just swooping attacks for the 10% attack speed. This is pretty important to get those resets with our Storm Strike. Down here, we have Pack Leader to get resets on our Poison Creeper, because that's where the majority of our Terra motes are going to come from, and we need to be constantly keeping that poison up on as many enemies as possible. Calm Before the Storm, so that our landslides can proc and reset the cooldown of our Petrify, which feels really good. And then now we have Masochistic, one of the best spirit boons in the game for Druid. Extremely strong. You want to try to fit this in any build you can. Our landslide has the shapeshifting tag. You can't see it in town, but it gains a shapeshifting tag so that this will work on our trampled earth landslides, and they're constantly critting, constantly healing you. So you can dive in, and while you're getting hit and your trampled earth is going off, it's just healing you up and keeping you topped. Finally, taking a look at our Paragon board, it is quite similar to the non-unique version, just kind of filled out. Obviously, I'm level 100, but I'll show you the way you want to kind of go. Whenever you're starting out, pretty much on every Druid build, I recommend going into the starter board and getting the exploit glyph to level 15 first and putting this here. This is going to pretty much increase the damage of any build you're playing. You don't need to go down here and get like these extra nodes or these nodes over here early on. You can always come back for these later. You pretty much want to beeline through the board and grab as many legendary nodes and glyphs as you can. As we work our way up here, you can get this before you have Vasili's Prayer, but it starts to get much more value when you do have Vasili's Prayer. So grab this whenever you do finally get the helmet. And here we have the Territorial Glyph, damage reduction against close enemies. We're diving into enemies, so we're always going to have the damage reduction up, and then damage to close enemies as well. Around here we have total armor while in werebear form and damage while in werebear form. Since we have Vasili's, we're going to be in it much more often. Some damage reduction and some armor. As we move over into heightened malice, whenever we use Poison Creeper, we pretty much instantly gain this bonus. So your goal is to trample into enemies, click Poison Creeper, and then if you're using it, click Petrify. So that way everything's poisoned, and then Petrify turns you back into a bear, and then all those trampled earths are getting all the bonuses of Heightened Malice, the poison bonuses, the Petrify crit damage. Super good combo. We work our way up to a little bit more armor, so we can get over here to the Fang and Claw glyph. This will give us more damage against close enemies. Again, we talked about we're always near enemies. And then while we're in werewolf or werebear form, and we're in werebear form more often because of Vasili's now. Pumps up our magic nodes. As you can see, we path through a lot of them. And then you want to go over to the Thunderstruck board next. So make sure you go this way. Don't go up first, go here next, so that you can see the bonuses on the rare nodes once you get to a high enough level. So here I have bonus damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, which we're applying with Exploit and Storm Strike. And then over here we have some crit damage and damage to crowd controlled enemies. In the middle we have Undaunted, which is damage reduction while fortified, and then some damage reduction while we're fortified. Then we want to work our way up to the Constricting Tendrils board. You can see here. Again, I mentioned this before, but I really didn't feel like Constricting Tendrils added much to the build. I know it could give you more Terra motes, but it just feels like terrible pathing, and I did not like going to it, so I opted out of that. Here I have the Spirit Glyph. Whenever we crit, it increases the damage the enemy takes, and we're constantly doing lots of little crits, and then we get crit damage with our core skills, which is Landslide, so that feels really good. Finally, we move into the last board here, Earthen Devastation. Our skills deal increased damage to enemies afflicted by crowd control, and you guys know we have tons of CC in this build with Poison Creeper, Immobilizing and Slowing, Petrify, Stunning, so we always have this up pretty much against trash mobs. And then we move into the last one, the Werebear Glyph, which, because we're going to be in Werebear more often, we now have this damage reduction up much more often. That's why I put this board last, in case you don't have Vasilis, so you want to have this eventually in the end. That's going to be it from me. I hope you guys are really enjoying this build as much as I am. I think this is such an amazing mid-game build that's so easy to get going. You don't even need all the pieces to start it. As soon as you get Trampled Earth, you don't even need Aftershock or even Symbiotic to try it. I really enjoyed it. I don't know if there's going to be any changes for season 1. If there's not, this is going to be my go-to mid-game build. I'd be surprised if there's not any balance changes though. But if there are balance changes, I will be making videos going over what my starter build will be, what builds I think will be good, how to level, all those things. So make sure you're checking back as we get closer to season 1. But until then, I wanted to do a couple more builds and try some more things out. I've got some interesting ideas, so I hope you guys like it. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.